Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. Just a quick public service announcement for anybody who has not signed up to my newsletter yet. If you want to head over to dramyrobbins.com, you can sign up for my newsletter. I'm just starting to introduce some new pieces to the newsletter that I think are really interesting that you can only get if you subscribe. So head on over there. And today, I'm welcoming Andrew Seaton to the show. So after formal and informal investigations into so many different ideas, experiences, and organizations, Andrew Seaton came to see that in our world, we are generally making some deeply flawed assumptions about life, knowledge, and human nature. And it is those conditioned assumptions that take away our peace. Andrew resigned from a 2-year stint as an education academic in order to focus on unlearning education and other conditioning and on awakening the fuller functioning that he had come to see so clearly as possible and desirable. Ultimately, this led Andrew to write his recently released book, Spiritual Awakening Made Simple, which he is here to talk to us about today. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you.
And you're all the way on the other side of the world from me.
Yes,
right now. You're a day ahead.
Down under, as they say. But that's right. We're just a little bit ahead of you guys.
And I asked Andrew when he got on the show, I asked him, how are things over there a day from now? Because I'm hoping that maybe, if they're better there, then we've got some luck or something coming towards us.
Yes, it's a different form of mediumship in a way, isn't it, to look into the future?
Exactly. So can you tell us a bit about your spiritual journey and what kind of led you to write this book?
Yes, thanks. I'll try and give you a little thumbnail sketch here. And the first thing I want to hone in on is the word spiritual, as I use it. For me, it's never really had anything much to do with beliefs. I've always felt, certainly since my late teens, that somehow there's something subtler to life than I'm able to grab hold of. Then something more subtle about me than I can somehow make tangible or observable. And there's something more to life than what's going on the surface. And it was just a dim sense to start with, and then when I went to college and started, studying school teaching, I found that really uninspiring, the formal training. But I read some books outside the curriculum that really helped to feed and confirm this sense that there's something subtler. A couple of those books actually were by Erich Fromm, and perhaps Amy, you might be familiar with Erich Fromm's beautiful writings about the art of loving and the sane society. Quite a topical topic at the moment, actually, wouldn't it? We could go down that avenue, but we won't. And another book he wrote, To Have or To Be. And so he was really describing, as it were, two kind of paradigms that we could live out in terms of our humanity. And anyway, I went on a long journey, both personal and in my professional life, interweaving all the time, trying to figure out how does this all fit together and what's causing all the bumps on the road and why are things so crazy out there. And in my work, it didn't make sense, how we educate children right now. And I did more study. I mentioned in the preface of the book, I had a dream early in the 90s that said, you need to do some more study about how the mind works. And over, a couple of years later, I started doing more study and eventually did a fair bit more study looking at what is the nature of learning and knowledge and human intelligence and how that plays out in terms of how we live out our lives. And wow, I discovered some interesting things. The first thing is that what we really understand most deeply about how humans function well and how they really blossom, and the sorts of conditions that support our blossoming, is that all that stuff flies in the face of how we school our kids. The way we school kids doesn't make sense. It only exists for political and historical reasons. But anyway, that's another thing that we might talk more about another time.
We might have a spin-off podcast.
yeah, indeed. But anyway, I eventually came to understand one of the real key things was that our mind is not the reliable faculty we've been taught to believe that it is. In fact, what gets in our way of peacefulness and a contented life, more than anything else, pretty much, is what we think we know with our mind. What happens is that since our very earliest childhood, we take on a whole lot of conditioning, a whole lot of kind of programming, or just automatic ways of functioning, thoughts, emotions, goals, feelings and dynamics of relationships, all sorts of stuff that we begin learning in the family, of course, and then we take on a whole lot more quite strong conditioning in our schooling system, especially conditioning about kind of self-image, the thoughts and ideas and concepts and judgments that we come to take on board about, what kind of person we are. But it turns out that all of this conditioning is just conditioning. It's not truth. It's not reality. And so when we live our lives out, and we may, majority of human beings, have periodic, frustrations and lacks of satisfaction, or shall I say the majority have quite regular lack of real satisfaction and lack of fulfillment. And some people have a lot of more intense discomfort, emotional discomfort or psychological discomfort. And increasingly, there's a lot of people with anxiety and depression and, fearfulness of the future and so forth. So what's going on with all that stuff? Well, it's simply that we're playing out our conditioned ways of perceiving things, or we get caught up in the interpretations that we make of what we see and hear and read and so forth and experience. And it's not so much what we experience as our life that causes us our frustrations and our emotional upsets or turmoils. It's the thoughts that we have about what we see or what we hear or about who we are that we believe. Even that last word is crucial, because thoughts, the other thing is that we think that we're our thoughts. Most people kind of live out their thoughts, and when you suggest to some people that they might just look at their thoughts or notice their thoughts or ask themselves, I wonder what the next thought to pop up might be. Oh, they suddenly notice that here's me. Oh, I'm seeing that there's a distance between me and my thoughts, whereas previously they've always thought they just are. I'm my thoughts, and they live it out. But when we look at this, we see that we're not our thoughts. And we can't ever show that the thoughts that we have about most things are true for sure. But when we have an experience, or even start thinking about who I am, we have thoughts about who I am. And they might be uncomfortable thoughts. Yeah, I'm not good enough, or, I'm unhappy all the time, or I'm whatever. But these are just thoughts that we believe, and so our emotional response to life comes actually as believing a thought that something is bad or not good enough or not how it should be.
So when you talk in the book, you talk about seeing what's real as part of spiritual awakening. Is this sort of what you're referring to, is sort of being able to separate what are the thoughts in our minds and the stories we're telling ourselves about those thoughts versus what the reality is?
That's right, Amy. Because in the book, I lead the reader to discover for themselves in a very straightforward way, through lots of examples and things that they can do, and from some anecdotes from my own personal life. I show them how they can look at thoughts and notice that they can't know that they're true. And as they begin to notice some of their habitual thoughts about themselves and about life really dissolving. They feel a lot more peace, a lot more presence, and they start to be able to see more clearly what's real about them and about the world. And so the first thing that's most beautiful is to be able to see what am I now free of in terms of how I've previously defined myself, or kind of self-image that I've had, or the habitual feelings that I've had about who I am. But another beautiful thing that flows from this regular noticing your thoughts, and noticing that you can't know that they're true for certain, and noticing that you are not your thoughts, is that the world around you also, and the people around you, start to be able to be seen more for what's really going on with them, rather than as our habitual interpretations of what things are on the surface, as it were. We be able to see kind of beneath the surface. And this is really helpful, because we can see many years ago, I read a book which said that the goal of schooling should be really to teach kids crap detecting, which is not a bad definition of a good goal for education. But what you find as you learn to notice your thoughts, see that they're conditioned in the main, they're habitual, they're not true, you begin to be able to see what's not real in terms of what you've previously thought about yourself, and what's not real in what you have tended to perceive the world around you and the people around you to be. So you can notice more quickly what's actually crap, what's really kind of a bit false about where this person might be coming from, for example, or this situation that's traditionally, or just in my own tradition, habitually for me, I regard these kind of situations as such and such. And you begin to notice, actually, I can see that that's not the case at all. You begin able to see things more as they are in reality, if I can use that word, inverted commas, reality, not according to somebody else's definition of reality, but more as something which is, as it were, registered by something deeper than our conditioned patterns of thinking and definitions of things.
And how does that move us towards our own spiritual awakening?
Well, I mentioned, that what troubles us usually is not what we're experiencing, but the thought that we have about what we're experiencing. So when we notice the thoughts that we have, and we begin to notice that there's no way that we can know for certain that they're true, well, what's left? It's like the thought has kind of crumbled into dust. And what's left? What's left is who we are. Presence, awareness, without the content of this conditioned thought that was previously kind of, as it were, distracting us from the essence of who we are as presence. And we were identifying with the thought, and perhaps with an emotion or feeling that might have been triggered by the thought. So we're caught up in that, thinking that this is what I'm experiencing, this is who I am, this is life. No, when we notice that there's a space between me and what I'm experiencing, then that's waking up spiritually. Because this word spiritually I'm using only to refer to who I am in my essence, who I am as the formless awareness that's in the background of the thoughts that pop up. Previously identified so much with the thoughts that I didn't notice that actually I'm that peace-filled observing awareness.
So how do we start to separate, or once we separate, how do we know that who we really are isn't our thoughts? Like, we're not thinking who we are as being defined by our thoughts. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does. And I lead people in the book just nice and easily and through a process of discovering for themselves. And initially, mostly through this process of when there's an emotion arise, having a couple of simple ways of responding to that. Now, the first one, to come right in on your question, how do we do it? If an emotion is you notice an emotion is there, a first very helpful thing to do is to first to acknowledge the emotion. Oh, I'm feeling really low, or I'm feeling angry at such and such, or whatever it might be. Or I'm feeling really bad about myself. I'm feeling really unworthy, or really like a loser, or something horrible like that. So the first thing is to acknowledge the feeling or the emotion. And the next thing that's really helpful is to say to yourself, instead of thinking, I am depressed, or I'm really angry at the moment, or something like that, say to yourself, I'm the awareness noticing a feeling of depression, or a feeling of unworthiness, or a feeling of anger. Mm-hmm. And this immediately puts a space between who you really are and the emotion. You suddenly it begins to lose its intensity, because you're noticing that I'm the observer of something that's going on. That's not me. That in itself is very helpful. And then you can look
so like I am feeling depressed versus I am depressed.
Even one step slightly further than I am feeling, because it's very, I am feeling depressed is quite close to I am depressed. And we come back even one step beyond I am feeling depressed. I am the awareness noticing a feeling of depression. I'm the awareness noticing the feeling. Yeah. Now, and then we can go to looking, and I show in the book nice and simply how to do this. Let's look then at what thought is actually triggering the emotion or the feeling. And then we can notice what the thought is, and question whether we know for certain that the thought is true. But I want to just jump back a step now, Amy, and just give your listeners one thing that they can even do right now to have a sense that there's this awareness that observes their experience, and the awareness is who they truly are. This formless awareness that's the observer of their thoughts and feelings and experiences who they truly are. And a simpler way to do that is to have your listeners think back to earlier in their life, when they were younger than 10, for example. Did they feel like they were them? Well, yeah, I remember when I was 8 and such, I was me. I was doing this, that, and the other. When you were in your mid-teens, did you feel like you were you? Yeah, of course I do. I was at high school, or I remember a time when I was at home and I was me. I remember, I felt like me. When you were in your 20s, did you feel like you were you? Yeah, of course. 30s, 40s, 50s? Yeah, I've always felt like I was me. Now, that constant is who people truly are. This awareness that's mostly been in the background, observing their life experience, observing the situations that they were in, observing the thoughts that were common or at that time, observing the roles that they might have had in life, all these sorts of things. Because if people look back, they can see that their bodies changed over all those years. They can see that a lot of the things that they believe have changed over those years. They can see that a lot of the things that gave them pleasure, their hobbies or their interests, a lot of those have changed. They can see that their roles have changed. I used to be a student, then I was a nurse, and then I changed my career and became a counsellor. For just as examples, and people can see that, okay, well, I can't be the things that I believe because they've changed, and I can't be my body because it's quite different now than it used to be, and several times. I can't be a doctor. I can't be a carpenter because there was a time when I wasn't a carpenter, but I still felt I was me. So that you get the idea. The listeners hopefully are getting the idea that this is who they are, this consciousness or this awareness, formless, that's been noticing their life experience all the way along. And now if they feel this invitation within themselves to begin to wake up even more, that's what this waking up even more is. It's about noticing more and more this sense of presence, of just formless awareness. And it's a nice feeling. This is the other thing that's beautiful about spiritual awakening and waking up to what your essential nature is, because I use the word formless. It's a kind of like a formless awareness, but it's not absolutely formless. It's kind of got qualities to it. Like, for example, when you question a thought that's been troubling you, what you notice is a feeling of peacefulness. So this presence has a nice sense of peacefulness and contentedness about it. And sometimes it takes on other kind of forms. It might have a nice sense of playfulness bubble up. You might notice, some of your listeners might be noticing that some of these kind of feelings associated with the essence of who we are the feelings that we sometimes notice are typical of the childlikeness of young children. And that's why it is there, because they haven't been yet so smothered by their conditioning that these qualities of the essence of who they are as being spiritual, by which I simply mean infinite or non-finite, more subtle than concepts, more subtle than forms, sort of formless. Those beautiful qualities are the essence of who we are. And this is how we rediscover or reawaken to those qualities as being our own nature. Even as an adult, you can enjoy the essence of who you are as that playfulness and that contentedness and that peacefulness.
So when you talk about in the book spirituality as an egoic quest, I thought this was really important. Because I feel like there is maybe that sense, particularly now as there does seem to be sort of more waking up, that spirituality is something to like achieve or to be conquered or to be spiritual.
Oh, I was just initially slightly puzzled by your question about spirituality as an egoic quest, because it's not quite a phrase, but now I know what you're talking about that I say in the book. Yes, most people who are interested in spirituality of the non-religious kind in our culture, nevertheless are caught up in some misconceptions about it, many people, partly resulting from the limitations of concepts and language. But we tend to think that spirituality is something that I need to cultivate. We talk about, spiritual development more often than spiritual awakening. And the ego many people aspiring to enlightenment or a spiritual unfolding or spiritual awakening are very attached to the outcome of being an enlightened person. And so actually for some people, the driver of what they like to think of as their aspiration to spiritual development or spiritual awakening is actually the ego, which is completely ironic, because the ego is, and when I explain in my book that I use the word ego simply to refer to the conceptual sense of self that we develop from an early age, the sense of me as being a separate being, a separate entity. I don't use it to mean, I'm the king of the world type of, sometimes we use ego in that way, but ego now, no, more broadly speaking, is this sense of self as separate. And along with that goes the sense of I'm this separate self that has these certain limitations or less attractive qualities, but also goes along, I'm this separate entity that has these various merits. And one of the most wonderful merits that some egos might aspire to, wow, wouldn't it be great for me, little ego, if I could be an enlightened person, which is completely ironic. But there are those who are in that.
Right?
Pardon?
It runs counter to enlightenment.
It really does run counter to enlightenment. And this hooks back into in a completely different part of the book. I talk about some traps that people are likely to get caught up in on the road of self-discovery, and I explain how they can avoid them or get out of them if they find they're starting to get caught up in them. They're basically all traps that the conditioned mind, that the ego lays in its attempt to survive. Because spiritual awakening is seeing through the illusion that I am a separate person and that I am the definitions that I have about who I am and that I'm better perhaps than these 5 people. The ego may even be happy to acknowledge I'm not as good as those several people over there, because it helps to confirm the sense at least that they are them as a separate entity with merits and demerits. But this is all illusions. as we've just been saying, the real essence of each person is the formless consciousness, which is underlying their self-definitions, whatever those self-definitions might be. So yes, Amy, and I make clear early on in the book that one of the strangest things and most lovely things to discover is that actually nothing could be more natural than this thing of spiritual awakening. It's not something that you need to strive for. It's not something that you need to spend years or decades, and some people believe lifetimes, to become sufficiently evolved and developed to be spiritually awake. That's all, I was going to say rubbish. I'll just be a little bit more gentle and say that's all a big mistake. It's all a big mistake. And so enlightenment is not a crown of achievement or a cup like a soccer cup or a tennis cup that you can put on your mantelpiece. It's not a personal achievement. It's a recognition that who you are is much more subtle than your definitions of you as a separate being.
That's a great kind of distinguishing factor. And I think to really be thinking about that, then it really is like an everyday sort of simple practice, right? I mean, this is what you're saying is spiritual awakening is natural. It's part of, we shouldn't have to work so hard at it.
Well, that's right. That's right. I mean, it does need some application, and that's what I explain in the book. It's simple. It's not easy. It's not like you flick a switch and tomorrow it's all done. So it is a case of taking a process of unraveling our identification with our thoughts and with form in general, our own form and the form around us.
And I think simple is different than easy, right?
Yes. It's not necessarily easy, but it is simple. And this is one of the key reasons I wanted to write this book, is that some of these things that I say, a lot of them are said by other people here or there or, in scattered kind of places. But I figured out how to, and I wanted to share with others a pulling together of the essentials into one concise, methodical, simple way of seeing how it all works and making it very practical.
So can you talk just before we wrap up, because I know you talk about you have an acronym, DAWN, D-A-W-N, that helps people move through awakening. So can you walk us through, I don't know if that word came to you, it's so perfect, right, for awakening.
It's kind of, coincidental, although a lot of people will laugh and know this, that a lot of people always use now the word coincidental with a smile on their face, because they know that ultimately in this universe, nothing is coincidental.
Right. My listeners for sure are at this point, like, there's no coincidence.
Right. And so it's
synchronistic.
Synchronistic, yeah. And because your listeners are the people that they are, I'll also add into this the synchronicity of my own personal path leading up to being able to write this book. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't accidental. It was synchronistic. I can look back on my own journey, and I've got goosebumps as I speak about this right now, that I've come to have this journey, a word I have some misgivings about, and I explain in the book why, but I'll use it now. I've had this path to now in order to be able to write this book, and it hasn't come together by accident. But now come to your question about the acronym that I offer people in the last chapter. But first I need to preface my comments about this with this point, that the acronym is a reminder for people of what they've discovered reading through the book. And so there's a limit to how much I can convey now, apart from the shortness of time that we have. Even if I was to spend a half an hour talking about that acronym, it couldn't have the helpfulness and the power that it'll have when people come across it after having read through the book, because the reading through the book is even not just becoming aware of some ideas. It's a process of their own recognition of things and their own discovery of things. And so at the end of the book, I offer this acronym to help people to bring this all together in any moment that they want to throughout each day, how to pull these discoveries that they've made together, so that within seconds they can come back to really being present and being the awareness self, who they truly are. So the acronym basically, DAWN, refers to the little simple methodologies I show people to disbelieve or disidentify from their thinking, from their thoughts, to allow their present experience, whatever it might be, to be whatever it is. Because after all, as they've been through this process of disidentifying with thoughts and disbelieving thoughts, the only thing that says that their present experience isn't how it should be is another thought. So while they may wish to do something in response to their present experience, the thought that their present experience is bad or not good enough, and the emotions that often triggers, that's not the case at all. They can't know that their present experience isn't as it should be. And so suddenly a relief and relaxing happens. And then the W is to withdraw their attention from their thoughts, from their mind, and to feel the energy in and around their body. And I show them earlier in the book about how they can do this. This is kind of like the very subtle energy that's kind of like the interface between me and the universality that is the essence of who I am. Between me and consciousness, there's something which is actually palpable. It's subtle and it's very beautiful, and it's this energy that we can feel in and around our body. And it helps to bring us and to keep us in being present, out of, withdrawn from identifying with the mind. So there's D, A, W, withdraw from the mind, and N is about noticing just what's real, being present here and now, not caught up in thoughts, just being really connected with the essence of who I am, present. I can see things as they are, also seeing that I'm the formless awareness, noticing these things, whether they're sounds that are popping up around them spontaneously, or somebody speaking, or whatever that it might be in their visual sight, or whatever they're kind of experiencing in that moment. They can see it with the previous biases and perceptual filters and prejudices and agendas no longer in play. They've been kind of put aside as we've disidentified from the mind with our thoughts. And so we are able to see things and notice things more freshly as they are right here and now. And that brings a nice, delicate feeling of appreciation to our present experience. So that's Dawn in a nutshell. But I really, again, want to emphasize to your listeners, that little acronym will have a great deal more effectiveness for you when you've read through the book and you've been through the things that it's kind of reminding you of.
And if people want to know more about where they could find your work, find you, other than Down Under, let them know where that is.
Yeah, thanks. It is a long way to come down under. So first thing, the book is available on Amazon and most online bookstores as a paperback and as an ebook, and in many physical bookstores it'll be there too. But in terms of connecting in other ways with me, I've got a website, awakeningmadesimple.org. Doesn't use the words spiritual to make it shorter. awakeningmadesimple.org. People could read the preface and introduction to the book there, but they can also read about one-on-one counseling and mentoring for spiritual awakening sessions that I offer people with online conferencing. There's a newsletter if people wanted to keep track of things that I might be doing, like talks or workshops or different things. They can keep in touch in that way. And on the contact page of my website, there's some of my social media links that if people want to follow me in that way, they can too.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for your time today, for explaining all of this and walking us through your wonderful book that really does kind of break everything down. So thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I enjoyed talking to you.
Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.